6. The wars we've lived and are living through, the Holocaust and other thermal devices, the parallel lines where that buck didn't stop, the madness of mutual assured destruction, the ethnic cleansings and subtler genocides, the villages they had to destroy to save them, the humanitarian aid for slaughter, tax squads and death squads and torture schools, the thousands disappeared into mass graves. Under the desks in class, under the table at work, under God by executive order, all those sweaty palms and sticky fingers, the Declaration of Human Rights never ratified by the U.S. Congress, the global ban of patents on light forms never ratified by the U.S. Congress, the Genocide Treaty ratified, but only after amendments 20 years later guaranteed the Stars and Stripes would never have to face charges in the World Court. Hardly a breather between the Cold War and culture wars when Uncle Strangelove wasn't bombing someone or paying someone to do the dirty work. The White House, a wing of the Pentagon a 5-star property of Wall Street. Conspicuous destruction, the most efficient means of keeping the wheels of production turning, while necktied ministers of the state religion, in collusion with millionaires on the Hill, unbuckle the regulatory restraints put on the financial Frankensteins who caused the crash and Great Depression, so the cycles of scams and bailouts can roll again every 10 years or so from Vietnam to Afghanistan. Junk bonds, high-risk real estate, high-tech startup.coms, layoffs, bankruptcies, foreclosures, each bubble bigger than the last one, more taxpayer money in corporate hands, more people fleeced, and lives ruined. The war on poverty sold out for napalm, the peace dividend invested in tear gas to keep the heads bowed down in the Middle East, Southeast Asia, Central America, Watts, Harlem, Detroit, Newark, South Chicago, to put the red flag down for the long count, to keep the meter running, to give the sick economy a shot in the arm, to pay for the glitz and greed and disbelief suspended under a B-grade father figure, asleep at the wheel, dreaming Buck Rogers plots, updated with 007 props, building the biggest national debt yet. The shadow economy of violence, military spending, domestic crime, a shoot-'em-up entertainment culture that dwarfs the GNP, the great communicator of hogwash, succeeded after a sordid comedy of errors in the cockpit of the free world by a dynasty afflicted with congenital free speech dysfunction, signaling in winks and code words to the lay order who voted them in, while putting the country even deeper in debt. The Gulf, where our bombs and radioactive bullets were no smarter than us. The cities burned, the millions raped and maimed, the brainless babies stillborn in border town free trade strips, the free fire zones, the Hefes swear, contain no people, only terrorists. Lend me your ears more than a figure of speech. Death as method, extinction as tactic, love of order gone ballistic, desire itself a debt owed to the government, the young set off to combat marriage, prostitution, by men with bleary eyes over bird-beak smiles, our lives eaten up with fear and hate commands of the national insecurity state, increasingly controlled by and for minorities of fundamentalist bigots. The myth of imminent military invasion by a hideous, malevolent alien cooked up by a bloated arms industry grown out of all proportion since Yalta. Of course the people don't want war, said Gearing, but get enough people to believe the threat is real. Propaganda more subtle now than ever. A politics of fear, turning the country into the spitting image of the state they said had to be eradicated. Hard to find anyone who doesn't believe under the spell of news spasms timed to create moods of widespread consensus prolonged by rituals of grief and vengeance there really is one crisis after another, that only generals and admirals and neocons on their payrolls know how to manage, keeping the permanent war economy state on the brink of utter catastrophe while upping the output of non-renewables squandered in perennial destruction. Billions spent on better mousetraps, billions to field test the latest spear, 25 million U.S. citizens active or formerly active military, millions more paramilitary, thousands in office good for nothing but to rise on occasion, light up the little screen and big board, toot their horns and take a stand for the right, make us feel again the old glory, the passionate story of market truths and consumer goods without doing squat to better the common lot. The checks and balances without which democratic liberty can't work, skewed by the weight of big money. Elections bought by fortunes spent on ads. Sellouts on both sides of the aisle voting for corporate deregulation, big stick diplomacy, consumerism, dumbing us down with cut-rate classrooms, miracles of science, passion play sports, sex, and infotainment, until it's hard to find anyone but wackos and wingnuts keeping even one eye on Uncle Sugar, dismembering the Bill of Rights with his secret government joystick. Our schools an anti-intellectual joke designed to keep kids off the street, off balance, locked down in narrow courses, funneling into the divide-and-conquer grid of pigeonhole career tracks, leading not to what used to be called education, certainly not to creative liberation, the integration of body, mind, and spirit, but to time clock and credit card, rituals of cutthroat competition, desires conformed to market values, belief to the myth of unending consumption in order to justify subsidies for research into novel ways of subverting nature. Our bodies, turning on themselves, unable in the blood soup of renegade chemicals, electromagnetic mishmash, and mutated genes to tell disease from health, good cells from bad. Our moral fiber twisted into legal briefs, religious tracts, arms brochures, our sacred desires spun into market demands, our future condemned by nuclear winter or aberrant planet wobble to hells of fire and ice, a global greenhouse filled with off-gases, or global deep freeze from a few degrees drop in the average annual mean. Our inner cities a national disgrace, clogged with human waste and misery, occupied by armies of sadist police. Our mentally ill and chronically poor turned out with runaway kids and shell-shocked vets, begging for food and shelter so we can play great white father to captive markets, brokering nations into client states under threat of hostile takeover, forced by the terms of economic war to privatize their country's public resources, to put their people in permanent debt to the banks, turn their subsistence farms into factories for chemical agribusiness export crops, until they raise so little food for themselves they have to import high-priced staples from us, precluded from even beginning to think in terms of economic independence or freedom to use their resources for their own needs, let alone global equity. Our prisons hotbeds of patriotism and rape, growing faster than the cells on a president's nose, the highest hard-time rate in the first world, millions of young men of all colors locked up in privatized cages, more blacks than the South had slaves, disenfranchised, So come election day, the law-abiding who put them away in the first place can count on that many votes against them not cast. 3% of the U.S. population, 12% of black men in their 20s, under some form of criminal supervision. The only crime of most, besides being poor, non-white, or both, believing the killing should stop. This leaf makes better smoke than that. Privacy is a basic human right. Equal opportunity is a scam. Freedom without equality, a lie.